Ladies and gentlemen, before we explore how childhood trauma shapes our adult relationships, we must first understand what childhood trauma truly is. Childhood trauma isn't always about a single catastrophic event. Sometimes, it's the absence of what a child needed most: safety, love, or consistent care. Trauma can stem from emotional neglect, physical or verbal abuse, witnessing domestic violence, growing up with addicted or mentally unstable caregivers, or even living in an unpredictable, chaotic environment. For a child, these experiences don't just pass by, they are stored not just in memory, but in the body, in the nervous system, and in the developing brain. A child who constantly feels unsafe begins to shape their entire worldview around survival. Trust becomes risky, vulnerability becomes dangerous, and love, it becomes something they may either chase too hard or fear entirely. You see, trauma isn't defined by how bad something was. It's defined by how deeply it affected the child. Two children could go through the same event and carry very different scars. That's because trauma is personal. It's the moment a child's internal world no longer feels safe. And if that sense of safety is never rebuilt, it follows them into adulthood, silently shaping their self-worth, their boundaries, their fears, and especially their relationships. Understanding childhood trauma isn't about blame. It's about awareness. And awareness is where healing begins. Now that we understand what childhood trauma truly is, let's explore how it silently and powerfully shapes our adult relationships. When people hear the word trauma, their minds often go straight to extreme events: violence, sexual abuse, war, or physical neglect. And while these are unquestionably traumatic, what many people don't realize is that trauma doesn't always have to come from something visibly severe. It doesn't always leave bruises or show up in court records. Sometimes, trauma is subtle. It's a child sitting silently in a room where their emotions are dismissed. It's the boy who never hears the words, "I'm proud of you." It's the girl who's made to feel like love is something she must earn by being quiet, obedient, or perfect. Childhood trauma refers to any event or pattern of experiences that overwhelms a child's ability to cope, leaving them feeling unsafe, unseen, or unloved. And because a child's brain and emotional system are still developing, these early experiences become deeply embedded in how they view themselves and the world. One of the most important things to understand is that trauma is not just about what happened to the child. It's about how the child experienced it internally. What feels like a minor event to an adult can be overwhelming to a child who lacks context, control, or emotional support. There are several types of childhood trauma. Some are acute, a single terrifying event like an accident, a natural disaster, or witnessing violence. Others are chronic, like ongoing physical or emotional abuse, neglect, or a long-term absence of emotional safety. And then there's complex trauma, which involves multiple traumatic events over time, often within the family system, such as a child growing up in a household with domestic violence, mental illness, substance abuse, or emotional unavailability. It's also important to highlight that trauma is not always caused by what was done. Sometimes it's caused by what was missing. Emotional neglect, for example, is one of the most misunderstood forms of trauma. When caregivers fail to notice, validate, or respond to a child's emotional needs, the child learns that their feelings don't matter, or worse, that they themselves are too much or not enough. These silent wounds often go unnoticed by society, even by the individual themselves. Yet they shape a child's self-worth, emotional regulation, and ability to form healthy connections later in life. Sometimes, trauma arises from being given too much responsibility too early. A child who has to emotionally support a depressed parent, care for siblings, or manage adult-level stress learns to suppress their own needs. They may appear strong or independent, but underneath that exterior is a child who was never allowed to just be a child. And in adulthood, they often carry a sense of chronic responsibility, guilt, or emotional exhaustion in their relationships. Cultural and societal norms also play a role in how trauma is defined or dismissed. In many cultures, the idea of emotional trauma is minimized. Phrases like, "stop crying, be strong," or "it's not that serious," teach children to shut down their feelings rather than process them. Unfortunately, what gets silenced in childhood resurfaces in adulthood, often in the form of anxiety, depression, relationship struggles, or difficulty with emotional intimacy. What makes childhood trauma particularly impactful is the timing. The earlier the trauma occurs, the deeper the imprint on the developing brain. Childhood is when the brain is forming its understanding of safety, love, trust, and identity. Traumatic experiences during these formative years disrupt that foundation. The child may internalize harmful messages like, "I am not worthy of love," "people always leave," or "the world is unsafe." These beliefs don't disappear with age. They often live on unconsciously, shaping behaviors and relationship patterns well into adulthood. It's also important to remember that trauma isn't just personal. It can be generational. A parent who never received emotional care may struggle to offer it to their child, not out of malice, but because they themselves were never taught how. Without awareness, these patterns repeat silently and across generations, unless someone decides to break the cycle. Understanding what childhood trauma is and what it isn't is the first step in healing. When we broaden our definition to include emotional neglect, chronic stress, and unacknowledged pain, we give people the language and permission to explore their own stories with compassion rather than shame. Only then can healing truly begin, not just for individuals, but for families and for the generations that follow. When a child goes through trauma, the impact doesn't just stay in their memory. It gets wired into their brain. During childhood, the brain is still under construction. It's forming pathways, building emotional responses, and shaping the nervous system. When trauma is introduced into the sensitive process, it disrupts the brain's natural development, creating patterns that can last for decades unless they're consciously addressed and healed. One of the key areas affected is the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. Its job is to detect threats and prepare the body for danger, triggering the fight, flight, or freeze response. In a healthy brain, the amygdala activates only when there's a real threat. But in a traumatized child, the amygdala becomes overactive. It's constantly scanning the environment for danger, even when there is none. This results in chronic hypervigilance. The child may grow up always feeling on edge, anxious, or overly sensitive to tone, body language, or facial expressions, reading anger or rejection, even where it doesn't exist. As they grow into adulthood, these heightened fear responses show up in relationships as overreactions, anxiety, or emotional shutdowns. Another area deeply affected is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational thinking, impulse control, decision-making, and emotional regulation. When trauma occurs, especially repeatedly, the prefrontal cortex development slows down. This means the child may struggle to regulate their emotions, think clearly under stress, or assess situations calmly. In adulthood, this can manifest as emotional outbursts, difficulty staying present in conversations, or a tendency to act impulsively in relationships, saying things in anger they later regret, or shutting down when conversations get emotionally intense. Then there's the hippocampus, the part of the brain involved in memory and learning. Trauma affects the hippocampus by making it harder to distinguish between past and present. That's why many adults with childhood trauma react to present-day situations as if they're reliving the past. A raised voice from a partner might trigger the same fear as when a parent used to yell. A moment of rejection might feel devastating because it unconsciously connects to years of being emotionally neglected. The brain learns to associate certain tones, behaviors, or even smells with fear, and those reactions live on, even if the adult logically knows they're safe. The nervous system also becomes dysregulated. A child exposed to unpredictable environments learns to live in survival mode. Their body is always ready to fight, flee, or freeze. Over time, this becomes their default setting. As adults, they might feel constantly tired but unable to rest, emotionally numb but easily overwhelmed. The nervous system hasn't learned how to return calm. Instead of flowing between stress and relaxation like a healthy system does, it gets stuck, leading to conditions like anxiety disorders, panic attacks, depression, or chronic fatigue. Beyond individual brain parts, trauma impacts the overall connectivity of the brain. A child needs safety and nurturing to build the bridges between emotional and logical brain centers. When trauma disrupts that, the child grows up without the internal tools to regulate emotion, express needs, or process complex feelings. In relationships, this can look like defensiveness, avoidance, shutting down during conflict, or feeling overwhelmed by emotional intimacy. They might not even know why they react the way they do, because the brain learned these patterns long before they had the words to describe them. It's also important to mention cortisol, the stress hormone. In trauma-affected children, cortisol levels remain high for extended periods. This not only affects brain development, but also the immune system, digestion, and sleep. These children may struggle to sleep through the night, focus in school, or feel physically safe in their own bodies. As adults, they might suffer from unexplained chronic illnesses, digestive problems, or difficulty with rest and relaxation. Their bodies never learn how to come down from survival mode. All of this shows us that trauma isn't just emotional. It's physical, neurological, and deeply embedded in how a person experiences life. The adult who struggles to trust, who fears abandonment, who overreacts to conflict, isn't broken. They're carrying a nervous system and brain that were shaped by fear, unpredictability, or emotional pain long before they ever had a choice. But there is hope. The brain has something called neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire itself. Through therapy, safety, emotional attunement, and consistent support, those trauma-based pathways can be gently rewired. With time and care, the amygdala learns it's safe. The prefrontal cortex strengthens. Emotional regulation improves. The body learns how to relax. And slowly, the adult begins to experience relationships not as threats, but as opportunities for connection, understanding, and love. From the moment we're born, we seek connection. A baby doesn't just cry for food or comfort. They cry for closeness, for safety, for the feeling of being held and understood. The bond that forms between a child and their caregiver becomes the blueprint for how that child will relate to others throughout life. Psychologists call this the attachment system. And when a child experiences trauma, especially from those who were supposed to protect them, that system gets disrupted. In a healthy environment, where a child's needs are consistently met with love, sensitivity, and safety, they develop what we call a secure attachment. These children grow up learning that people can be trusted, that their emotions are valid, and that it's safe to express their needs. As adults, they tend to form stable, fulfilling relationships. They're not afraid of closeness, but they're also comfortable with independence. But for children who grow up in chaos, whether through emotional neglect, abuse, inconsistency, or fear, the attachment system learns something very different. One of the most common outcomes of childhood trauma is anxious attachment. In this style, the child never knows if their caregiver will respond with love or rejection. Maybe sometimes the parent is warm, but other times cold or unavailable. This unpredictability wires the child to cling, to overanalyze, and to constantly seek reassurance. As adults, these individuals may become overly sensitive to their partner's moods. A delayed reply, a slight change in tone, or even a quiet moment can trigger panic. Are they mad at me? Am I being abandoned? These fears aren't irrational. They're echoes of childhood uncertainty. Love feels fragile, and emotional security becomes something to chase. Then there's avoidant attachment, which often develops when a child learns that expressing emotions leads to rejection, punishment, or being ignored. These children internalize a dangerous belief: I must deal with everything alone. To survive, they shut down their emotional needs. In adulthood, avoidantly attached people may appear independent, even distant. They struggle to be vulnerable, to express affection, or to depend on others. They might withdraw during conflict, downplay their feelings, or avoid emotional conversations altogether. Deep down, they crave love, but they've learned to protect themselves by staying emotionally unreachable. Closeness feels threatening, even if they desire it. A more complex pattern is disorganized attachment. This often results from severe trauma, especially when the caregiver is also the source of fear, such as in cases of abuse. The child wants to run to the caregiver for safety, but simultaneously fears them. This creates a confusing, painful inner conflict. As adults, those with disorganized attachment may swing between anxious and avoidant behaviors. One moment they desperately seek connection, and the next, they push people away. Their relationships can feel like emotional roller coasters, driven by deep confusion about what love even is. They may sabotage intimacy because, in their nervous system, love has always been tied to fear. These attachment styles don't form by choice. They form by adaptation. A child does whatever they must to survive emotionally. If crying didn't bring comfort, they stop crying. If expressing fear led to being mocked or punished, they learn to hide it. These adaptations become survival patterns. But in adulthood, they often turn into relationship problems. A partner may feel confused, unloved, or overwhelmed by the intensity, distance, or unpredictability of someone whose attachment style is wounded. But beneath it all, the truth remains. These patterns were born from pain, not personality. It's important to recognize that no attachment style is fixed forever. Just as a child can be wounded in relationships, an adult can also be healed in them. With awareness, therapy, and emotionally safe environments, a person with anxious attachment can learn to soothe their fears and trust love. Someone with avoidant attachment can begin to let down their walls and risk vulnerability. And those with disorganized attachment can find stability and learn that love doesn't have to hurt. Healing begins with self-understanding, by recognizing that many of our emotional reactions in relationships aren't flaws, but echoes. They're protective reflexes from a time when we were small, scared, and simply trying to survive. When we name our attachment wounds, we no longer let them control us unconsciously. We begin to respond, not just react. Childhood trauma doesn't have to define a person's future. It shapes us, yes, but it can also awaken us. When we understand how our earliest bonds formed, we gain the power to choose different ones today. Love, when it's safe, consistent, and kind, has the power to rewire even the deepest wounds. And in that process, something extraordinary happens. The child inside us, the one who longed for safety, who cried for love, finally feels seen, heard, and held. When a child experiences emotional wounds, especially during the critical early years of development, something deep and invisible begins to take root, a fear that getting close to others could bring pain instead of comfort. In the mind of a traumatized child, vulnerability doesn't feel safe. It feels dangerous, even life-threatening, because it was never met with care. Maybe they were made to feel weak for expressing emotion or punished for showing sadness. Maybe the people who should have held them were the very ones who hurt them. And so, without realizing it, they grow up learning to hide their truest feelings, to armor themselves against the very thing they long for most, connection. This fear of vulnerability often continues into adulthood in ways that can be both subtle and heartbreaking. For many, the idea of letting someone in, really in, stirs up old, buried feelings of fear, shame, and distrust. They may want love, deeply. They may even fall in love. But the moment intimacy begins to feel emotionally real, they pull away. They build walls. They might go sabotage or emotionally shut down, not because they don't care, but because caring feels unsafe. Vulnerability, which is necessary for true intimacy, feels like exposure to danger. For people with such wounds, expressing true emotions can feel risky. Telling someone, "I need you, I feel hurt," or "I'm scared," feels like handing over a loaded weapon. They fear those words will be used against them, twisted, ignored, or rejected, just like they might have been when they were younger. So they stay silent. They laugh when they want to cry. They act strong when they're actually breaking inside. And sadly, their partners, friends, or even therapists may misread their silence as indifference, coldness, or emotional immaturity, when in fact it's often unhealed pain manifesting as emotional armor. This emotional armor becomes a coping strategy. It says, if I don't let anyone see my weakness, I can't be hurt again. But this strategy, while protective, is also isolating. It keeps people from fully experiencing closeness. Relationships become surface level or strained. They may become overly independent, insisting they don't need anyone, or they may unconsciously seek out emotionally unavailable partners. Because that feels familiar. That kind of emotional distance feels normal, even though it's actually a repetition of old wounds. Another common sign of this fear is difficulty in expressing or receiving affection. Someone who's been emotionally wounded as a child may struggle with physical closeness, eye contact, or even words of affirmation. Compliments might make them uncomfortable. Loving gestures might be brushed off or questioned. Do they really mean it? What do they want from me? These are the thoughts that echo in the minds of people who've been taught, often unconsciously, that love isn't safe or that affection comes with strings attached. Sometimes, these individuals also fear that if they show who they really are, including their pain, flaws, or past, they'll be rejected. So they keep relationships shallow, or they wear a mask of perfection. But deep down, they crave being seen. They yearn for someone to look past the mask and say, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere." Unfortunately, until healing begins, that craving often feels unreachable. Healing from this fear of vulnerability is not about forcing yourself to open up. It's about gently, slowly learning that not all closeness leads to pain, that there are safe people in this world, that it's okay to ask for help, to show emotion, to need others, and that doing so is a sign of strength, not weakness. This kind of healing often starts in safe, consistent environments like therapy, support groups, or deeply patient relationships. Bit by bit, the person begins to test the waters. A small truth shared, a tear not hidden, a moment of letting someone in, and realizing they didn't break because of it. The process is rarely linear. There may be setbacks, moments of fear, even running from love that feels too real. But with time and compassion, the walls begin to soften, the armor becomes unnecessary, and the person who once feared vulnerability begins to embrace it. Not all at once, but in their own quiet, powerful way. Because the truth is, vulnerability is not weakness. It's the birthplace of connection, intimacy, trust, and healing. And for those who have survived emotional wounds, learning to be vulnerable again isn't just healing, it's transformative. It's reclaiming the very thing they were once denied, the right to feel, to connect, and to be loved exactly as they are. Breaking the cycle of childhood trauma isn't easy, but it is absolutely possible. And it's one of the most courageous steps a person can take toward building a healthier, more fulfilling life. When someone grows up carrying emotional wounds from early neglect, abandonment, criticism, or abuse, those patterns often carry over into adult relationships. But here's the powerful truth. Patterns can be broken, and healing is not only possible, it's transformative. The first step is awareness. Many people don't even realize they are reenacting their past until they start noticing the same pain showing up again and again. Choosing partners who trigger old insecurities, reacting defensively, fearing abandonment, or struggling to trust love. It's in these repeated emotional experiences that the roots of trauma often reveal themselves. Once a person becomes aware that their past is silently shaping their present, the journey of healing can truly begin. But healing doesn't mean forgetting or erasing the past. It means learning to face it, understand it, and rewrite the emotional scripts we've been unconsciously living by. For some, this process starts with therapy, a safe space where someone can talk about their past without judgment, perhaps the first time. A therapist doesn't fix you. They walk beside you while you begin to see your story differently, with more compassion, more clarity, and less shame. In this process, many begin to realize that the way they were treated as children was not their fault, that they were not unlovable, broken, or weak. They were just children trying to survive in environments that didn't support their emotional needs. This realization alone can lift a lifetime's worth of guilt and self-blame. From there, healing moves into building new tools, learning how to set boundaries without fear, how to communicate feelings without shutting down, and how to stay emotionally present even when it feels uncomfortable. Breaking the cycle also means becoming conscious of the kind of relationships one chooses. Often, people who were hurt in childhood are drawn, without realizing it, to partners who mirror that pain. But healing gives us the power to pause, to reflect, and to ask, does this person feel safe? Do I feel seen and heard with them? Am I being loved for who I am? Or am I trying to earn love by hiding parts of myself? These questions are not easy, but they are essential for breaking out of patterns rooted in trauma. Another key part of healing is learning self-love and self-parenting. Many people with childhood trauma never had a nurturing figure who could teach them how to soothe themselves, how to talk kindly to themselves, or how to believe they are worthy, simply because they exist. As adults, we get the chance to become that nurturing figure for ourselves. This might mean writing letters to our younger selves, practicing affirmations, or simply being patient when we fall into old habits. It's about saying to ourselves, I know where this pain comes from, and I choose to respond to it with love, not punishment. Healing doesn't mean you'll never feel triggered again. It means you'll start to recognize your triggers, understand them, and respond differently. Instead of shutting down during conflict, you'll learn to breathe through it. Instead of pushing love away, you'll start to let it in little by little. You'll begin to understand that being vulnerable isn't dangerous, and that healthy relationships can exist even after trauma. And here's something beautiful. As you heal, the people around you feel it too. When you show up in relationships with more awareness, more honesty, and more emotional regulation, you set a new standard, not just for yourself, but for everyone who interacts with you. You model what it looks like to break the cycle. Whether it's with a romantic partner, your children, or your friends, your healing creates a ripple effect. You stop passing down pain, and you start passing down wisdom, strength, and emotional safety. Breaking the cycle is not a destination. It's a lifelong process. There will be moments of progress and moments of setback, but every small step matters. Every time you pause and choose a new response instead of reacting from old wounds, you're healing. Every time you offer yourself compassion instead of criticism, you're healing. Every time you reach out for support instead of suffering alone, you're healing. In the end, healing childhood trauma is not just about repairing the past. It's about reclaiming the future. Your ability to love, connect, and thrive in relationships built on trust, safety, and emotional honesty. It's about giving yourself what you always deserved, and perhaps helping others believe they deserve it too. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this journey into the hidden layers of childhood trauma and its lasting effects on adult relationships, one truth becomes clear. The past is never really just a past. It lives within us, shaping how we love, how we trust, how we protect ourselves, and how we respond to connection. Many of us walk into adult relationships carrying invisible wounds, the unmet needs of our childhoods, the fears we never voiced, the touch we never received, or the chaos we were forced to normalize. We seek love with hearts that were taught to fear it. We crave closeness while running from vulnerability. And often, we repeat patterns not because we want to, but because they feel familiar, even if they hurt. But here's what I want you to remember. Trauma may shape us, but it does not have to define us. Awareness is the first step. When we understand how early experiences formed our attachment styles, our emotional triggers, and our behavioral patterns, we begin to take back control. We begin to respond, not react. We begin to heal. Healing from childhood trauma isn't linear. It takes time, patience, and often support, whether from therapy, safe relationships, or deep inner work. But with each step, we begin to rewrite the story. We begin to choose love over fear, connection over avoidance, and truth over silence. To anyone listening who sees themselves in these words, know this: you are not broken. You are human. And healing is not just possible, it is your right. Because when we understand our past, we free our future. Thank you for listening to Whispers of Psychology. Until next time, stay aware, stay kind, and keep healing.